Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's webcast, Mobile ROI, How to Achieve Massive Results, brought to you by Venturebeat and Adjust. I'm Rachel Brownell, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides and other goodies by clicking on the Attachments button above the presentation window. If you are experiencing any technical problems, please visit our help guide by clicking on the help link in the Rate This box. You can participate in the Q&A session by asking questions at any time during this webcast. Just type your question into the Ask a Question text area below the video window and then click the Ask a Question button. At this time, we recommend you disable your pop-up blockers. Now, on to the presentation, Mobile ROI, How to Achieve Massive Results. Discussing today's topic are Jonathan Winters, User Acquisition Specialist, MiniClip Games, Sebastian Gold, Lead Performance Ad Networks, InnoGames, Paul Müller, Co-founder and CTO at Adjust, and Stuart Rogers, Director of Marketing Technology at Venturebeat. Before I turn it over to Paul, we're going to go ahead and launch a poll for the audience to take a look at. If you go ahead and click on your votes button, you'll see that it says, are you currently calculating ROI on your marketing spend? And you're to choose one. A, yes, using it every day. B, yes, but it's not a daily KPI. Or C, no, it's not important for us. Or D, no, we don't have the tools or the system. So go ahead and take a look below your viewing screen and answer the poll. With that, I'll turn it over to Paul.
Hi, everybody. So just to get started, I'd like to establish some basic idea about what we're actually going to talk about. So the first thing that you hear a lot of people say is, of course, that they're calculating the ROI, or you get a lot of tips and tricks on how to raise your ROI. However, talking to our clients, for example, I find that many of them have a very hard time to get the seemingly simple term of ROI right. Because as it turns out, the devil is in the details. There's a lot of things that you actually need to pay attention to and that you need to consider when actually trying to find out what your ROI is. Because as it sounds as a very static, simple thing, it isn't. It is actually a definition that you have to find for yourself that makes sense for your business model and for what you're actually trying to achieve. So let's go through step by step what things you actually have to pay attention to if you want to get to an ROI that has any useful meaning to you. So the first thing, of course, is the return part, the revenue, the money that you're actually making or the money that you're supposedly making. Because let's look at it. There's a couple of things that you need to consider depending on what actually your business model is. For example, if you are an e-commerce app, one of the main problems that you all know is, of course, the revenue that you get from selling goods does not represent the actual profit that you made from a certain campaign if you drove a user to buy something. That depends on what your actual profit margin is. And of course, it also needs to factor in the return rate. And assuming that the return rate and the profits are equally distributed across all of your products, all of your users, is usually an oversimplification that leads you to get very, very wrong results and do not represent your actual ROI. So for the e-commerce clients, it's typically very important to actually track not just revenue, but also track profit. And if possible, even if you have a tool that allows you to do so, even factor in return rates. So in the long run that you get very accurate readings of your revenue that you made with a certain campaign. And the other thing, of course, when we're looking at e-commerce is the problem that you have if you have a website and the user finishes his purchase on the app or vice versa, that you need to take that into consideration, like where to attribute that revenue and what to actually to connect these data points. Usually you can use the login that the user is using or some kind of user ID that you're creating to find out if there's a connection between the two. That's what most of our clients are actually doing. For the inner purchase crowd, for the whole games and virtual goods, there is, of course, one thing that is absolutely important to do to find out what your actual revenue from a certain campaign is, and that is to verify your in-app purchases. Actually, there's a very, very nice white paper in the attachments that we wrote that gives you a very, very in-depth view of the things that you need to technically consider to set up in-app purchase verification correctly. Because if you don't set it up correctly, there's a good chance that your revenue that you're tracking is not just off by a factor of 10, but you're also targeting the wrong users. Because if you're saying you want to, track the whales in your application, then you're not distinguishing between the people that are just creating fake in-app purchases, which is what happens if you're not verifying your in-app purchases. Then you may actually end up targeting users or creating lookalike audiences of users that are just generally faking in-app purchases and defrauding you for your virtual goods. And of course, one of the very interesting things in many of the startups that are, yet to figure out their monetization model is that they're looking at KPIs like the K-factor, so users inviting more users to viral, or the virality of the application of users driving more users. And it is an interesting concept to consider that actually has a certain value to you, because if you would buy an install, you would pay for it. So a user that drives more people into your app may actually generate a certain value for you. So some of our clients are actually setting up revenue events for the event that when a user invite new users and they're actually converting, so they can get let's say, relative value of how their viral campaigns or whatever rewards they're using inside the app to trigger this behavior. And they can create a very nice overview for them to actually find out which of their campaigns or which of their certain in-app measures actually leading to more users, bringing newer and more users in. So that's the revenue part. So that's the very rough overview of that you need to consider for the revenue part. Now on to the I part, the investment, the money that you're actually spending on media. That sounds even easier, at least in theory. Like, okay, I know what I spend every month on my campaigns. That's the bill that I'm paying to the ad networks every month. However, the problem, of course, is that it's rarely that simple. For example, if you're running an in-app cross-promotion for one of your ads in another app, that technically costs you money because it has opportunity costs. You could use this display space to display an advertisement, which would bring you in money. So you need to factor in that actually costs you, the opportunity to display something else, which is for many games a significant part. You could display an interstitial for an application where you get a certain CPM out of these displays, or you could display an advertisement for your own app. And so you need to consider that there's a certain cost attached to that. And as I said, with the networks, it sounds easy, but here the problem is actually getting the data from the networks. The problem is that many of the networks partners or many of the media partners that you're buying from are, let's say, very or not very advanced when it comes to passing cost data to you or the measurement tools or the attribution partner that you're using. So we're seeing that there is a couple of APIs, like Facebook has one, Google will soon have one, and Twitter is having one, that allow you to pull the aggregate cost data and connect it to the individual campaigns to let you calculate the ROI. Some partners, and we're talking around like 40 people in the market, allow you to attach costs to clicks, or so that you can get on the click a CPI or CPC or a CPA, and then calculate the actual cost off of that. That still leaves a couple of hundred networks out there that have no ability by themselves to pass the data in any way programmatic, meaning it falls back to the good old typing it in by hand, which of course is not anybody's favorite, but sadly, to give you a full overview as of right now, there's still a lot of manual labor involved. However, I believe that, moving forward and having tools such as Adjust that do allow you to have it programmatically, that there's going to be more pressure on the networks in the market to actually provide the data in some kind of programmatic way, so that none of us actually has to sit around with a huge set of Excel tables and have to copy-paste data from one tool to another to get an actual understanding of what's going on. So that leads me actually to the next point. To find out the ROI, it's not just like having what you make and the revenues and having your investments. It is actually understanding how to define which parts of your revenues actually belong to what campaign. And that process is, of course, attribution, which you hopefully have a dedicated attribution tool for, because it is becoming more and more complicated to attribute correctly, given the plethora of inventories that you could actually buy from, and all the mechanical difficulties or let's say settings that are at your disposal to define when a revenue actually belongs to a campaign. It starts with things like attribution models to understand how long is a user going to be attributed to a campaign, what events are going to be attributed, how does a user, for example, can be re-engaged if you have a churned user, specifically in games. We see that a lot. The churned users are being brought back into the app by a campaign. That needs to be, of course, considered, that campaign creates a value by bringing back inactive users. And you're thinking about things like attribution windows. How long can there between a click and install or between a click and event for you to define that a certain revenue is attributable to a certain campaign? And why I was saying that it makes sense to have a dedicated attribution partner, not just because I happen to have founded one. The main reason is actually that if you're relying on the individual network's numbers, you're going to quickly run into the problem that everyone's going to claim everything. If you count together what your Facebook, Twitter, and Google dashboard is telling you, you should be making double the money that you're seeing actually on your bank account, because they're not deduplicating the attribution that they're doing. Everybody is claiming everything, specifically given that they're usually giving themselves quite generous attribution windows that you may not even agree with, specifically when it comes to money and attributing revenue to campaigns. And one of the other things that we specifically focus on and have started a huge campaign at the end of last year is actually fraud, to understand how networks get scammed by their publishers in return, faking your installs or creating also events that are not real and are giving you a false impression of how successful a campaign is. And to try to do that in a do-it-yourself solution is definitely a huge challenge. And so when you're choosing a tool to actually, define your attribution, it makes sense to consider to have some safeguards against fraud in there to allow you to pick and choose when exactly what is not to be considered revenue and not to be displayed into your ROI KPIs, so that you can get a clear view and actually not like an overestimated view, because that's one of the most common things that can happen to you if your attribution settings are very generous, if you have very long attribution windows, you're using view-through attribution, that you end up with a vast overstatement of how much of your revenue is actually depending on a certain campaign, and that would of course lead you to spending your money in all the wrong places. And well, I usually start with this slide when I give that talk. It's that 3 easy steps for ROI calculation. Of course, there is one more that no one really likes, but sadly necessary, is the math to figure out exactly what an ROI, what does that even mean? Because ROI, if you're taking the naive assumption, would just be how much the user spends over his entire lifetime. The problem is that sometimes that can be longer than your company has money. So when you're, for example, the latest hyped game and your job as a UA manager is to buy as much inventory as possible, but your money that you're spending on media is actually driven by the in-app purchases themselves, you need to understand the ROI of a certain period. So not just the ROI over the entire lifetime of a user, which could be something like half a year or even a year, given how sticky your app is. You may need to look at ROIs of like 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, 60 days. On top of that, it makes sense to look at shorter term ROIs to give you an estimation of how a certain cohort is going to develop. So there's a lot of talk about predicting ROI and predictive models. Most of these models are simple extrapolation or not so simple extrapolation models that are looking at the already collected data and are trying to find a fitting onto those. Meaning that many times looking at a shorter term, for example, the 7-day ROI KPI will give you a very similar result of understanding how this cohort is going to evolve. And of course, as I'm using the word cohort all the time, it is very important to look, of course, at cohorted revenue. You can't just look at I spent in June I spent $5,000 on a certain campaign, and from that campaign I got back $5,000 in revenue. You actually have to understand which users did you actually acquire in June and how much did they spend so far. So meaning you have to cohort the users by their install date or by their click date, and you need to understand the difference there as well, because you spend money typically on the click date, and many KPI revenues or KPI cohorts will actually be displayed on the install date, so there's a certain discrepancy. Or you have a tool that allows you to see both, like for example Adjust is doing, and so you can exactly see what months did you spend, how much money, and how much return did you get exactly from that money that you spent. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at numbers that are really very tough to compare and not giving you the full picture. So I think that gives us a pretty good basis to have a discussion now and to talk a little bit more about your questions and the things that you guys want to know more about. And so I'm handing it back to Stuart.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really, really interesting, Paul. Thank you. I just wanted to have a look at the poll results before we get into the main audience Q&A. Thank you, audience, for answering our poll and voting. So it seems that 33% of you are currently calculating return on investment on your marketing spend every day. And 17% of you are using it, but it's not a daily KPI. Interestingly, 42% are not and don't have the tools or systems yet, and 8% you're saying it's not important for you. So we have a slight majority of the audience here, our live viewers. Obviously our on-demand viewers aren't voting, but our live viewers here, a slight majority are not using these because they don't have the tools or systems in place. So hopefully with the audience Q&A, we can answer some of those questions and get you well along your way. Maybe for the people that feel it's not important for them, we might be able to elevate its importance in your life. And for those of you that are already doing it, first of all, well done. I'm pretty sure that you're enjoying a competitive advantage because of that. But maybe we can get into some of the details around things such as, high quality, acquisition and the differences in return on investment, in lifetime value, segmentation. Maybe we can get into, conversations around why it's important to have a good attribution model for return on investment and those sorts of things. I know there's a lot of questions from our audience. Thank you very much, audience, for asking questions. If you would like to, please go ahead and ask more questions in the questions box. We've got a good amount of time for questions today. We have a lot of them in the system, so I'm going to hand back to Rachel to take us through the first set of questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart. So the very first question is related to what you just talked about. And the question is, why is the attribution model important for the ROI calculation? And Jonathan, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Here at Miniclip, we have defined attribution model. Also with the help with like tracking partners such as Adjust. And the attribution model is important because you need to unify everything that you do in user acquisition to one specific attribution model. So Paul already mentioned that Facebook may use a different attribution model, a longer one, a more generous one versus your typical video ad network versus the affiliate network. And you want to make sure that when you look at numbers, the attribution is all on the same level. So you define a specific last click, if you have a last click attribution model, a last click time window. Some companies in the gaming space even use post-view attribution models for video ads. And then once you have that defined, you use those tracking providers to gather your data in order to calculate ROI. So what happens if you don't do that? What could happen is that you mix up all the data with different attribution time windows or claiming windows, and suddenly you will get different results because you add data that is actually wrongly attributed to a source into the mix, and therefore you will not be able to calculate the true LTV.
Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan. Sebastian or Paul, do you have anything to add?
No, I think that pretty much sums it up.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I also agree.
Okay, great. Sebastian, this one to you, another great question. It says, how do you prove that your ROI model is working?
Paul already mentioned it, especially for gaming companies like us, for example, or also Miniclip. I just imagine that at the end you just have to extrapolate and forecast your lifetime value, because there's really the different financial view on the cash flow you actually got in the money every month, and the lifetime value, depending on how long you define your lifetime, if that is a half year, a year, or even 2 years, you just need to make sure that you find a way to extrapolate your money. And at the end, if you extrapolate, you just need to make sure that on a regular basis, you definitely prove your model that you actually defined. And then at the end, adjust your estimation model or the forecast factors that you're actually using on a monthly or even on a weekly basis.
Fantastic. Stuart, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, I think, almost wrapping up something from the last question and this question. Obviously attribution, talking about the last question, it was talking about, attribution, and that ties in with ROI. We're talking about how do you prove your ROI model is working. One of the things that occurred to me when our other panelists were giving their answers to those questions is, we also have to just think not in terms of paid as well, because I think it's quite common that when people think about return on investment, when they think about attribution, when they think about proving those models, they tend to assume that that conversation is completely around paid media and completely around acquiring users. But that's something that you have to just consider, and it isn't always the case. You want to think also about your organic, or what sometimes people call free marketing techniques too, because guess what? Free marketing techniques aren't free. They cost you time, they cost you effort. I'm presuming that most people are either paying themselves or staff to do this, and that costs money. And it's quite easy to consider a lot of the free techniques as completely free of charge. And then when you look at your attribution models and you find that actually there are a number of techniques that aren't working for you, but they're free, so you discount them. And you shouldn't do that. You have to take all of those costs into consideration. You have to think about investment of time and effort. You have to track back everything and work out whether your free marketing campaign is actually costing you more money than what you're getting back out of it, because you could be spending that time and effort on other higher value, higher return on investment strategies. And it's just something that occurred to me when we were talking about these last two questions in concert, that free doesn't mean free, and in fact it could be sapping you in terms of high value, high return on investment campaigns. So attribution is very important, and proving that your return on investment model does also take into account ensuring that your free marketing campaigns are put into the mix alongside your paid media. Wouldn't you say, Sebastian?
Definitely agree. I can just tell, out of my experience at InnoGames, the free installs, we don't calculate the opportunity costs or the costs who actually, we're coming from people actually working on that. We only calculate the media cost, but at the end, on the revenue side, we definitely take all the organic installs or sign-ups into account, because at the end, this is just kind of a multiplier for your lifetime value. And especially thinking of mobile, if you're really pushing your user acquisition efforts, you can also climb up in rankings, and this will even push you more on organic. So you should definitely always put the organic share somehow as a multiplier on your lifetime value calculation, and therefore also put it in your ROI calculation.
What's your view on that, Jonathan? Because, you know, I've actually seen some situations before where the focus on organic has been so strong that in fact they're spending so much money in the opportunity cost. But in fact, some of the more effective campaigns and marketing techniques are paid, but they're missing out on those because they believe them to be more expensive than the expensive free campaigns they're doing.
Yeah, generally I agree. I think overall paid and non-paid user acquisition goes hand in hand, really. Obviously, it also depends on, because you were mentioning resources, how many people are working actually on the marketing side. Depends how you want to allocate those resources, and it's definitely you can have a huge success running paid campaigns versus non-paid. Obviously, you always want to leverage as much of the non-paid user acquisition as possible, keeping the cost in mind, as you mentioned yourself. I just wanted to also add on top of the organics. I mean, Sebastian already mentioned that the part where you calculate the organic uplift into your LTV is something that we here in Miniclip do as well. The viral effect, what we call the K factor. It is actually not that easy to calculate that. So how much organic uplift do you actually achieve from paid campaigns? So through recommendations, etc., or sharing. You can apply things like the Net Promoter Score to evaluate how many of the users that you get into the game from the paid marketing are promoters, and therefore you can assume or estimate a higher organic uplift, as well as Sebastian mentioned correctly, the visibility in the App Store with the ranking.
Yeah, excellent. It occurs to me, Paul, you didn't get a chance to chip in on how you prove your ROI. What's your sense?
Well, I mean, there's what we already said. If you're working with predictions, there's definitely need to check if your predictions or the multipliers that you're using on your short-term ROIs are actually correct. Many times I've seen a very radical way of doing it, because we had a client on board and for the first time ever use attribution, actually using ROI calculation, and the tool coming to the conclusion that the certain campaign has an extremely low ROI, and basically they were burning 90% of the budget, and they were disagreeing with that and saying that, you know, they believe that more of their revenue is actually coming from that. So they did actually stop the campaign for a short time and actually see, just what happens then. And it turns out that the modeling that we did was within 90% correct as what would happen if the campaign would stop. Of course, that's a very radical way to just prove your point, but overall it always makes sense to check the actual reality, the numbers that end up on your bank account from time to time with the modeling that you do, so that you don't have any drifting apart there.
Excellent.
Great conversation, guys. I have actually quite a few other questions, and I'll continue to move along here. And this is related to what you just discussed. The question is, what kind of tool do you use to calculate ROI, both internal and external systems? And then what attributes do you add to that formula according to different customers and segments? Why don't we start with you, Sebastian?
The tool we are using is we develop by our own. It's actually, it's just a huge, big database of users where we make our cohort analysis and all the prediction by ourselves. Why are we doing this? Because we are originally coming from the old desktop browser game section where no such nice tools were ready. So we just had to build everything by our own. And on the other side, as we still have games who are playable in the browser desktop side and also in mobile, we always need a solution which is capable of make the tracking cross-platform. Therefore, we have a server-side solution which we built our own. And the different customers or segments, I think it's how you define or how you build up your lifetime prediction model. Because you should be aware that, or you should at least know how to calculate your lifetime cohorts. And if you just see that given segments are just bringing in higher lifetime cohorts than others, and if you then use kind of a similar or the same extrapolation factor, at the end, the total lifetime will already be then higher than of the lower segment.
Excellent. Stuart, do you have any thoughts on this topic?
It's a really interesting topic. There are a ridiculous, and I mean absolute, of mobile app analytics solutions. And in fact, one of our analysts, former analyst John Coetzee, did a study of mobile app analytics. He was looking at what the winning developers are using versus what everyone else is using. He did a really big study. It was actually quite huge. As with all of the insight studies, he looked at a small data set, and by small I mean thousands of practitioners. And he asked them what they were doing, and from the results of that, he was able to work out which of those people were succeeding and which were doing as well as everyone. But he particularly pulled out of the pack the ones that were getting much better results than everybody else. And then he looked at all of the vendors, and I don't know if you've ever seen the app analytics space, but my goodness, there are a lot of people out there doing a great job and producing amazing tools. The results were that he actually had to come down to sort of 8 really quite mighty solutions that are doing some incredible things in the space. There are tracking all of this. All of that's in that study on DB Insight. The answer is that there are so many, you really have to go and have a look and evaluate the ones that are going to work for you, the ones that are going to fit your size of business, the ones that are going to give you the answers you want, because we're all trying to track different KPIs and metrics depending upon what our app is or game is trying to achieve. So yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of people out there. I don't like to just pull out names willy-nilly because it sounds like an endorsement of one, and we produce completely independent reports at DB Insight, but the answer is that there's a wide landscape out there, and you really have to evaluate them all.
Exactly. And so I'm going to turn this one, it's applicable to what Adjust is up to, but Paul, do you have anything to add here?
Sure, of course. I mean, there's quite an interesting notion. I mean, there's a lot of players out that do all types around app analytics, but if you boil it down a bit, and what you need is the point that I touched. You need the ability to track your revenue and verify your purchases. You need the ability to have independent, configurable attribution across the big partners that you're buying. And when you're looking just at the combination who's supporting Google, Facebook, and Twitter, you basically boil it down to 4 parties. Which Adjust is one of, and then the ability to add cost data into it. Right now, most of our clients are using either self-build or standalone solutions to aggregate the cost data, then combine that with the attribution data and the revenue attributions that we've given them. We've seen this as one of the last major hurdles for many of our clients to just get their day-to-day business based off the actual ROI of the campaign. So what we're doing right now is a closed beta with our first clients where we pull cost data from APIs like Facebook, and adding, for those networks that are supporting it, to give us cost data via the click, and combining it and showing it actually within the same dashboard. So you can see all the attribution analytics and cost combined into one dashboard and only one dashboard. You don't need like 1,000 tools to actually collect it. And this is definitely something where the list gets a lot shorter. And there, the question simply becomes like, how much convenience do you want? Do you want to have like 3 different tools and try to reconcile, or even 4 different tools if you have purchase verification as a standalone solution? How many of those tools do you want to reconcile with themselves? There's only going to be so many companies that are going to offer this as an entire suite, because it's just a certain level of complexity that needs a certain engineering staff to support. So again, for our clients, there's currently a closed beta that ties everything that we talked about into one tool, and we're looking to actually release that during the year as like a major new feature for all of our clients.
Thank you, everyone. Jonathan, I was just curious if you had anything to add to this one. And again, we're talking about the tools that you might use to calculate ROI.
So for Miniclip, we have, I think it's similar to what InnoGames is doing. We have our internal tools developed by our data scientists, by business intelligence team. I think a lot of the bigger companies in the mobile space have that in-house tool connected to various different tracking solutions or other dashboards such as Adjust as well, right? And gather all the data in one place and evaluate and verify everything with the game server data. So we know all the device IDs and user IDs from our games directly from our own game servers. Obviously, this way we can verify the actual value, the revenue, and therefore calculate the LTV, make better prediction based on that. But I agree also regarding the tools that are available. It is amazing how many the tools are available, and it is actually essential for also smaller developers, indie developers. There are tools out there that are also not very cost intensive. They are either free or very, very cheap to start with for low scale analysis. So I think there's always a good starting point, even for the smallest developer.
That's fantastic. So just a reminder to the audience, it's not too late to add your questions in the question box below the viewing window. And we'll just keep right on going. We've covered ROI, and now we've got another question here from the audience. And it says, I'm worried about click fraud and how that impacts my calculations. What are the best ways to manage this and understand how big the problem might be? And Jonathan, why don't we start with you this time?
It is actually one of my favorite topics regarding like fraudulent traffic, really, because I have many discussions with ad partners, networks, also data scientists about this. We are always very, very careful with our tracking data, and usually you need to be careful and have some system in place that measures how many clicks are being triggered in what specific time frame, because once you see click spamming happening, it can result in stealing organic users, for example, because it's just firing clicks even though there was no ad that was clicked on. So you look at the click-through rate and compare it with other channels, for example. So if you see that the click-through rate is actually really, really low compared to other channels that have a higher click-through rate, that is a first indication. And obviously, one of the things you can do is always contact the ad partner or the source and ask and investigate more about what actually is happening there. And then on the other side, in-house, you can look at the clicks timestamps and when the install timestamp is happening. So it should be a click and an install fairly soon after the click timestamp, and it should not be a click from one device 1,000 times, right? Who sits at home and clicks on one ad 100 times an hour? That's obviously not the natural behavior.
Exactly, and people are getting paid to do this, and it sounds like you've got a good approach to figuring it out. It is an interesting topic. Stuart, how about you? What are your thoughts about click fraud?
Yeah, it is a prevalent problem, and you do have to be absolutely cognizant of it. In fact, Paul, I remember you did a really very good guest article on Venturebeat some time ago about this, if I remember rightly.
Actually, I did a couple of those, so thank you.
Yeah, install fraud, click fraud, whatever you want to call it, it is threatening to, undermine what everyone is trying to achieve and what everyone is trying to do, and everyone's just trying to do the right thing and do a good job out there. It's something that is a problem, but as long as you are aware that it exists, as long as you are aware of what click fraud looks like and the patterns that it produces, as long as you have either balances, checks, processes, or tools in place to assist with understanding the level of click fraud, the level of install fraud across your across your analytics, then you can make the relevant adjustments in terms of real customers versus not real, and therefore get a much better view of your return on investment, your lifetime value, how much it's costing you to acquire users, and all the things that you're going to need to know to understand which of your marketing strategies and tactics, which of your segments, which of your channels is the best one for you. But yeah, it pays to be completely aware of it. You're right to be a little worried about it, whoever asked that question, and thank you for it. But it is completely manageable in terms of understanding when it happens, because click fraud does exhibit a particular pattern, just as Paul said. And do please go and check out Paul's articles on this on Venturebeat. I'm pretty certain that if you type Venturebeat and Paul Müller into your favorite search engine, then they will come up straight away, and you can read them.
Thanks, Stuart. And Paul, since you've written about this extensively, what would you add to Stuart and Jonathan's comments?
Maybe just to sum up and to give like a let's say a simplified overview. There's different types of fraud, and again, you can read all about it. And one of the types of fraud is click fraud or click spamming that actually claims your organic users towards a campaign where they wouldn't belong otherwise, or where they actually haven't been produced by clicks that aren't really clicks. People just pretending or sending clicks to us as an attribution partner that result in your users, and actually by that fact, of course, your revenue being attributed to campaigns. So you'll see a campaign that actually has great KPIs, great ROI, and you may be tempted to actually spend more money on it. So the important part is, of course, to be aware that this is happening, to understand how these campaigns, what kind of behavior they exhibit. For example, extremely low conversion rates, or something like 0.0x% is definitely a red flag you need to pay attention to. And I mean, there's easy ways to get rid of it. Not to like drum my own beat a bit too much, but Just has a tool to filter this out in real time from your traffic, where you just turn on the fraud prevention, and we do all the analysis for you to understand the frequency of certain clicks coming in. So if one user allegedly clicked 100 times before converting, that may not actually be a human being, or if there is a certain pattern between the click and install time and the distribution that makes no sense, typically that should be a strong exponential decay. But if it turns out to be more of a flat line, to take those installs and actually attribute them towards organic, where they belong, and not towards the campaign, so you're not tempted to spend more money on such stuff.
How about you, Sebastian? What do you think about click fraud, and how do you track it?
Those click spamming fraud is really one of the worst, because as Paul already mentioned, if they claim the organic, they will normally have awesome KPIs, and therefore you tend to actually want to scale up that channel. And as Paul already mentioned, those partners will most of the time have millions and millions of clicks, which you don't see at other partners. But to see this, of course, you need kind of a unified tool similar to Just, which we also use, which I didn't mention in our ROI calculation tools. But besides this, all the other fraud you normally get like incentivized instead of non-incentivized. Those things you at least see in your retention rates. But this click spamming is really something new, which just came with mobile.
Exactly. So it's something that everyone has to think about whether they like it or not. So on to the next few questions. And as a reminder to the audience, go ahead and send your questions along. And also take a minute to rate the presentation before we close. We use those ratings and track your feedback very closely. So here's another question. Everyone wants to know, how do you do this ROI analysis? And this one is consistent with that. It says, what's the most difficult part of generating an ROI analysis, and what needs to happen, either in a business or in the industry, for that factor to be reduced? And I'm going to start with Stuart at this one. And Stuart, you can maybe lead the conversation on this interesting topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Most difficult part of generating an ROI analysis. I mean, being an analyst, I would argue that the most difficult part of generating a return on investment analysis is not having the data to generate a return on investment analysis. the thing here is if you don't have a really good grasp of the data, an understanding of what that data means, because data alone is not insight. Data's easy, insight is hard. And if you don't have the tools in place to track and nail everything down and really build that picture, that makes everything really, really difficult for you. Of course, that changes dependent upon, what type of app you're trying to produce, what type of game you're trying to produce. You want to be tracking different metrics. And it's difficult to do that without the analysis tools in place as your first starter for 10. If you don't have that all in place, if you don't understand why you're tracking certain things. I will tell you that in terms of, analytics and the kind of KPIs that developers use the most, when we studied thousands of developers and asked them what they're tracking, they are mostly tracking things like active users, installs, retention rates, how much their app crashes, what the session lengths are, how many sessions they have, usage, user acquisition, all of those things. There's dozens of KPIs they track. You need to nail that down in terms of what is important to you, and you need to make sure all the tools are in place to grab the data, because without the data, all you're doing is making decisions based on gut checks. That's probably a nice sort of starter. It would be great to hear from the rest of our awesome panelists in terms of what they think. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
I think Paul mentioned that earlier. Gathering all the data into one place, and that includes the ad spend, the cost data, for example. It is quite challenging because, as Paul mentioned, a lot of suppliers and user acquisition don't have an API call where they can send the cost data to your own platform tool or whatever analytics tool you use. So there is a lot of manual process in that, and every business intelligence team we get a bit nervous when they don't get the right cost data from the various different sources. So that is always a bit of a challenge to collect everything. The other thing is then when we talk about ROI, there is two things. The observed ROI, so if you want to analyze what is currently the ROI you're seeing for what has already happened, like on day 7, day 14, whatever is already available, versus the expected ROI. So a lot of marketing people sit down and they look at their product and say, okay, what if I'm spending $1,000 a day? Will it be worth it? Will I break even? Will I lose my money? So that is always a question, and people get nervous about that. So analyzing the expected ROI based on what you have spent and what you're seeing as you go, that is a big challenge, because you need to have like a prediction formula, and we have a data scientist, business intelligence team here, who they work really every day on that module. And that can be quite tough, because what is the minimum cohort size to make a decent prediction, right? What if the prediction is false and you suddenly realize, oh, actually, what was ROI positive is now ROI negative. So things like that is always, something to consider.
Fantastic. And how about you, Sebastian or Paul? Do you have anything to add to how do you create what's the most difficult part of generating an ROI analysis? It sounds like there's lots of challenges.
Sure, and if I may, I think currently the most, let's say, tedious thing is getting the cost data in a consolidated form. That is what we're seeing is currently severely underdeveloped in the industry. Networks simply do not have any API to share the cost data programmatically, either as aggregates or as real-time feed. As I said, 40 out of 800 partners currently support that, which tells you a lot about the current state of networks and their progress in doing this. So what I believe is that we need to see more pressure from the advertisers towards the networks to tell them, hey guys, I want to be able to access my cost data, because I don't want to have 2 or 3 interns that all day long type data from your dashboard into our dashboard to consolidate it somehow. And I believe that's a trend that's definitely going to happen this year, as more and more tools are actually added to have this kind of support to pull cost data programmatically, and not just like offer you an option to type it all in, because I don't think anyone wants to sit down and type, from 100 different dashboards the cost data into their platform. And so that I believe is one of the biggest things that needs to happen, and I hope will actually happen.
No more interns typing in data. I think we can all agree on that. How about you, Sebastian? What are your thoughts about the most difficult part of generating ROI analysis?
I'm really excited to see the new feature from Adjust that Paul mentioned, because as I can say, it's still the case that for a few partners you still have to access all the different dashboards and really sit down and write down all the stuff to your Excel files or BI reports or whatever. And this, of course, just costs time. And you don't need this data on a monthly or on a yearly base. You need it on a daily base or even less, because you actually need to know how much you're spending and how are your campaigns looking like. And what I also want to mention again is what Jonathan just said, that at the end it's also about statistical evidence or statistical significance, because if you judge small campaigns, which just with 100 installs, and then look on your payers, which is maybe on a lower percentage, and then you actually make all the adjustments or your estimates or evaluations on so less payers, then you should be, or you just need to make sure that also the statistical evidence or significance is given, and this you only can get if you look on big data.
So this next question is somewhat related to that. Obviously, there are challenges that we've already talked about with developing an ROI analysis. So here's a specific instance of that. And the question says, how do I calculate ROI for a new game launch? And maybe we can go into some specifics about your experiences launching new games and how you calculated the ROI for that. And Sebastian, why don't we start with you this time?
Yes. If you're lucky, then you already have some games launched, and then you have a lot of data which you can just take and just use this data for also estimating and predicting the lifetime value of your new game. If you're kind of new in the business, then of course it's really hard, and I think there's no one perfect solution. But I would definitely recommend to start slowly for new games. It's already common to make some soft launch in some given markets. So really start small, just see the lifetime values that you see, and then really start with your first small marketing efforts, and then really look on a monthly basis if what you actually came up with your model, if this really makes sense. Because then if you don't do this, you can really come into this situation where you just start spending, and of course in the first month you most likely will make a loss, because the money you spend in the first month you won't get the money back in that month, because as Paul already mentioned, the cash flow versus lifetime value view is different, and therefore you should just make sure that you don't overpace and just spend more than you actually get back in.
Good points all. How about you, Jonathan? What's your experience calculating ROI with new game launches?
It is always a challenge, to be honest, because every game is different. Every genre is different. We always say every game is unique, right? What we try to do is, what Sebastian meant, looking into patterns that we see in other games or similar games, right? So if you have the data available from previous titles, then you look at it and you look at the monetization model that you apply, and you make estimations on how that monetization model will work out based on your experience. If you don't have the data, then I agree with Sebastian. You should start slow. You should look. You should pay close attention to where do you monetize your product, whether it's advertising, whether it is in-app purchase, and look at measure all the in-app events if possible, right? It's essential to understand when you soft launch your title. Okay, what does the user do within the game, right? For example, retention rate is a very crucial metric in order to maintain ROI positive results. So gather as much as learnings as possible. Other companies in the world have sort of like very long soft launch periods where they test and troubleshoot the game, and they even pull out the games if it does not meet the expectations they have. Really, information is key here.
As far as information and data, when you're launching probably a new product as well as something like a new game, how about you, Paul? Do you have anything to add in terms of a good approach to calculating ROI?
Well, yeah, I think we already covered the kind of depends situation. It is really hard to give some general advice on that. If you have any kind of data to go on or any kind of experience that you can apply, otherwise, yeah, what we've seen many clients do is just simply run very long soft launches, as we already covered. So yeah, I think the most important part is, of course, like measure right from the beginning. So don't like, oh, we can figure out measuring later. Measurement and attribution and actually tracking your ROI has to be in your game from day one. Otherwise, you can't actually develop the game KPI driven to get where you need it to be. So I think that would be my main point to make.
How about you, Stuart? What do you think about calculating an ROI for a new game launch or just a new app launch or product launch?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously difficult if this is your very first time, as all our panelists have said. If you've at least got something that you can base this on, even if it's a completely different genre, different type of game, if you've been previously developing apps and this is your first game, there's so much that you can't learn from, your original sets of data as much as there is, that you can learn. A game, you're going to want to think about, what are the user acquisition costs. You can benchmark these, and you can read articles. You can look at studies and reports. There are tools out there that allow you to get good examples of similar categories, similar games. What kind of monthly active users they're getting. Obviously, benchmarking is important. You want to be thinking about, your mobile influence, in terms of, is this a game that has a strong mobile influence, capability? Is it, is every single person that comes into it potentially going to generate for you 2 or 3 or even 10 additional users, because it has social elements and, shareability, et cetera, et cetera. You want to think about, just looking around at all the available data. I mean, for example, when we studied mobile user acquisition and what was working, we looked at every single category. I mean, you had some wildly differing costs of acquisition. Hidden object games, not much competition, so they were down at $1 a user for a high value user. But you look at some of the massively multiplayer games and MOBAs and that kind of things, and people are paying $12, $20, sometimes $50 to acquire a user, and so you need to know all of these benchmarks. You need to just basically go out there and do your very best guesses in terms of what's going to work, what's not going to work, and be as realistic as possible. And then, of course, soft launching, we've mentioned that. There's lots of different techniques there. Maybe you launch in New Zealand, because that's a similar demographic market to the United States of America, and you get some early data and you see if it's, if your assumptions are correct or not. And move forward from there. You want to get data as early as you can, and then once you've gone through a reasonable soft launching campaign, you'll at least have a good shot when you launch to your wider market in maybe the US market or somewhere else. It does come down to all of the data, but there's a lot that you can do because there's a lot of tools and services and web services and reports out there that can help you benchmark before you start with the soft launch process.
Thanks, Stuart. And guys, we're out of time. This has been just a fantastic discussion. A reminder to the audience to go ahead and rate us for this discussion, and go ahead and contact our panelists if you have further questions. I will be going back into the attachment section and adding those articles that Paul wrote so that you can have access to those if Google didn't come up with what you needed. So anyway, on behalf of our sponsor, Adjust, and our guests, Jonathan Winters with Miniclip Games, Sebastian Gold with InnoGames, Paul Müller With Adjust and Stuart Rogers with Venturebeat, thank you for attending our webinar today, Mobile ROI, How to Achieve Massive Results. You'll be able to listen to this webinar again on demand at this location. If you enjoyed today's event or have suggestions for how we can make it better, we'd love you to give us a rating. We take these ratings very seriously and love hearing of ways we can deliver even better content to serve your interests. I'm Rachel Brownell, signing off for Venturebeat. This webcast is copyright 2016 by Venturebeat and Adjust. The presentation materials are owned by or copyrighted, if that is the case, by Venturebeat and Adjust, who are solely responsible for its content, and the individual speakers are solely responsible for their content and their opinions. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.